The Assyrian Empire is regarded as one of the earliest and most influential state models in human history. It would be insufficient to view it merely as an ancient civilization. Assyria represents the first major laboratory of what we today call an empire. Many of the fundamental components of modern states, centralized administration, a professional standing army, provincial governance systems, road networks, population policies, propaganda mechanisms, and systematic knowledge archiving, were first developed in a structured and intentional way by the Assyrians. For this reason, Assyria is not only important for its military achievements, but also for the revolutionary transformation it brought to the very concept of statehood. From Rome to the Persian Empire, and even to modern nation-states, many political structures have directly or indirectly inherited elements of the Assyrian model. However, the story of Assyria is not only one of success and organization. It is also a story of fear, destruction, and forgetting. Imagine an empire so feared that after its collapse, its conquerors did not simply defeat it. They attempted to erase its very name from history. Its cities were systematically destroyed, its temples burned, its royal tombs looted, and for centuries, people lived above its ruins without knowing what lay beneath their feet. The origins of Assyria go back much further in time. While the Sumerians were building city-states in southern Mesopotamia, different communities already existed in the north along the Tigris River. The cities known as Ashur, Nineveh, and later Erbil rose in a strategically important region located at the intersection of two major trade routes. One route extended from Iran through Anatolia to the Mediterranean, while the other connected north-south Mesopotamian corridors. This geographical position gave Assyria a major advantage. In its early stages, Assyria did not emerge as a conquering power, but as a commercial hub. Assyrian merchants established trade colonies deep into Anatolia, forming extensive economic networks that connected distant regions. These networks were family-based systems in which trade, knowledge, and wealth were passed down through generations. This early structure gave Assyrian society a high level of organization and discipline from a very early stage. However, northern Mesopotamia had harsh geographical conditions. While southern Sumer enjoyed fertile alluvial plains capable of producing multiple harvests per year, the north was drier and far less agriculturally productive. This imbalance created a constant dependency on external resources. Over time, this dependency evolved into a necessity for expansion. Survival required access to larger and more fertile territories. By the end of the second millennium BC, the entire Near East experienced a massive collapse. Known as the Bronze Age collapse, this period saw the simultaneous downfall of many great civilizations. The Hittite Empire collapsed, the Mycenaean civilization disappeared, and even Egypt was significantly weakened. Trade networks disintegrated, cities were abandoned, and in some regions writing systems were entirely lost. Assyria was also affected and was reduced once again to a small territorial core. However, this collapse also created the conditions for rebirth. From around the 10th century BC onward, as stability gradually returned, the Near East became fragmented into numerous small and aggressive competing states. In this new environment, Assyria needed to transform itself into a more centralized, disciplined, and militarized structure in order to survive. During this period, the Assyrians reinterpreted ancient diplomatic documents and treaties as instruments of political legitimacy. Agreements made centuries earlier were still considered binding, and they were used as justification for military expansion. If a city had once sworn allegiance to Assyria in the distant past, this was enough reason for it to be reconquered centuries later. This ideological system was reinforced by the cult of the god Ashur, who stood at the center of Assyrian belief. Ashur was not merely a god of war, but the embodiment of universal order and divine justice. Associated with the sun, he was perceived as a force that revealed truth through light. Therefore, anyone who disrupted order was not only a political enemy, but also a violator of cosmic law. Within this worldview, warfare became a sacred duty. Assyrian armies believed they were not merely conquering territory, but restoring divine order. As a result, Assyrian inscriptions describe warfare in a detached, technical, and bureaucratic tone. Violence is not portrayed as brutality, but as necessary justice. One of the greatest transformations of Assyria occurred in the military domain. The systematic use of camels and horses dramatically expanded the empire's operational range. The camel enabled long-distance logistics across deserts and mountainous terrain, while the horse fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. Initially, cavalry units served mainly as support forces. Soldiers would ride into battle but dismount to fight. Over time, true mounted archers emerged, capable of shooting from horseback with high mobility and speed. This development made the Assyrian army one of the most effective military forces of its time. In parallel, siege technology advanced significantly. Battering rams, mobile siege towers, and specialized engineering units made it possible to breach even the strongest city walls. Warfare was no longer limited to open-field battles. Cities themselves became vulnerable targets. One of Assyria's most important innovations was the creation of a professional standing army. In earlier societies, armies were typically composed of farmers who were conscripted during wartime. The Assyrians, however, established a permanent military class that was continuously trained, paid, and organized. This army was supported by a network of garrisons spread across the empire. Yet the true strength of Assyria did not lie solely in its military power, but in its administrative system. During the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, a highly structured governance model was developed. Conquered territories were classified into different categories. Some retained local rulers under Assyrian supervision. Some were governed by puppet officials, and rebellious regions were directly administered by imperial governors. This system transformed Assyria into one of the first true administrative empires in history. Roads were built, communication networks established, and logistical hubs created. The state became not only a conquering force, but also a continuous governing mechanism. Assyria also implemented one of the most radical population policies of the ancient world: forced deportation. Conquered populations were relocated across different regions of the empire. The purpose was not only punishment, but also social engineering, mixing populations to prevent rebellion and weaken local identities. People were resettled in new lands, given new names, and gradually integrated into a broader Assyrian identity. This system can be seen as one of the earliest examples of what we now call a melting pot. In some cases, debts were also forgiven, giving people a chance for a new beginning. This demonstrates that Assyria was not only a system of repression, but also a system of restructuring society. One of the most fascinating figures in Assyrian history is Ashurbanipal. Unlike most kings, who focused primarily on military conquest, he was deeply interested in knowledge and scholarship. In his palace in Nineveh, he established a vast library and collected clay tablets from across Mesopotamia. This library contained approximately 30,000 tablets, including historical records, religious texts, medical knowledge, mathematical problems, astronomical observations, and literary works. One of the most important works preserved there was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Thanks to the durability of clay tablets, much of this knowledge survived for thousands of years. However, Ashurbanipal was also an extremely ruthless ruler. He captured enemy kings, displayed them in humiliating ways, and reinforced his authority through fear. This reflects the fundamental contradiction of Assyrian power, a civilization that preserved knowledge while simultaneously practicing extreme violence. In 612 BC, the Assyrian Empire collapsed. The Medes and Babylonians joined forces and captured Nineveh, destroying the city completely. Assyrian cities were systematically dismantled, and the empire was erased from political existence. Yet the system survived. The Babylonians inherited Assyrian administrative practices, which were later refined by the Persians into the satrapy system. Even Alexander the Great adopted similar governance methods during his conquests. The provincial system of the Roman Empire also continued this tradition. Assyria had disappeared physically, but its ideas lived on. Centuries later, in the 19th century, excavations by Henry Layard led to the rediscovery of Nineveh. Massive palaces, monumental statues, and thousands of clay tablets were uncovered from beneath the earth, revealing a forgotten chapter of human history. In 2015, the destruction of Nimrud dealt another major blow to the physical remnants of Assyria. However, many of the tablets remain preserved in museums and collections. In conclusion, the story of Assyria is not merely the rise and fall of an empire. It is the story of how ideas, systems, and models of governance can outlive the civilizations that created them. States may collapse, cities may fall, armies may disband, but ideas continue to survive, carried forward within the structures of future empires.